In every war the United States has ever fought, generals have sometimes died in battle. It happens. But it happens rarely because a general is meant to direct a fight, not to stand in the middle of it, and most of them die old, in their beds, with their reputations long since made. So hold this fact in your mind for a moment. On a single November afternoon in 1864, in the space of roughly 5 hours, 6 Confederate generals were killed or left dying on one small field in Tennessee. 6. In 5 hours. No single day in the entire Civil War killed more general officers than that one did, and very few days in all of American military history have ever come close to it. And they did not die scattered across a long campaign. In 6 separate fights, they died within sight of one another, on the same ground, in the same doomed assault, and they died because one man gave one order that nearly every officer who heard it understood was suicidal before it was even carried out. This is the Battle of Franklin. It is sometimes remembered, vaguely, as the place where a Confederate army threw itself away, but the truth is darker and far more specific than that. Franklin was not simply a defeat, it was a decapitation. In one afternoon, the Army of Tennessee lost its brain. Its best and most experienced commanders were cut down almost together, and the army never recovered from it. This is the story of the 6 men who died in those 5 hours, and of how an entire army lost its head in a single charge. To understand why 6 generals lay dead or dying by nightfall, you first have to understand the order that sent them forward, and you have to understand it quickly, because the order is not really the subject of this story. The men who obeyed it are. The Army's commander was John Bell Hood, and the night before Franklin he had suffered a humiliation he simply could not stomach. At a place called Spring Hill, he had trapped a retreating Union army, and then, through a confusion of failed and misunderstood orders in the dark, he had let it slip away right past his own sleeping campfires. He woke the next morning incandescent with rage, convinced that his men and his officers had let the enemy escape out of cowardice and a failure of nerve. And so, when he caught up with that same Union army at the town of Franklin, where it had dug itself into a strong line of earthworks behind nearly 2 miles of open ground, Hood made a decision that looked less like strategy than like punishment. He ordered a frontal assault in the open, in broad daylight, against entrenched infantry with barely any artillery to support it. Around 20,000 men would have to cross those 2 miles of bare field into the muzzles of a prepared enemy. It was a larger assault than the famous Pickett's charge at Gettysburg across worse ground, and it was the kind of attack that the previous 3 years of war had proven, over and over again, simply did not work. His officers knew it, and here is the cruel heart of the whole thing. They went anyway. The generals of the Army of Tennessee, the men whose duty it was to lead from the very front, formed up their soldiers and rode forward into a fire that every one of them understood was likely to kill them. 6 of them were right. And before we follow them across that field, let me be straight with you, because this is exactly the kind of story this channel was built to tell. The history most people are handed flattens Franklin into a single sentence, a bloody Confederate defeat, and then moves on without a backward glance. It almost never tells you who actually died there or what it truly cost an army to lose all of them at once. We do. So if you want the history with the real names and the real weight left in it, then stop right now and subscribe, because this is the only thing this channel does. Now, the first of the 6, and the one that mattered most. If you remember only one name out of the 6, remember this one: Patrick Cleburne. He had been born in Ireland, an immigrant who came to America with no money and no connections, and made himself, by sheer ability and will, into what a great many people believed was the finest division commander in the entire Western Confederacy. They called him the Stonewall of the West. He was a careful, intelligent, almost scholarly soldier, a man who studied the craft of war late into the night and who earned in return the complete and fierce devotion of the men he led. In an army that was short of nearly everything, of food, of shoes, of horses, of hope, Patrick Cleburne was the one genuinely irreplaceable thing it still possessed. He was its tactical brain. And by the accounts that survive, Cleburne understood with perfect clarity what the order to attack at Franklin actually meant. He looked out across that open ground and at that fortified line, and he seems to have known, with a cold and terrible certainty, that he was looking at his own death. He is remembered as having said that if the order was to make the charge, then they would make it, and that if they were to die, then they would die like men. And then he led his division forward into it. His horse was shot out from under him almost at once. He found another, and that one was killed too. So Patrick Cleburne, the best mind in the army, went forward on foot, on his own 2 legs, into the smoke and the rifle fire, his sword in his hand, walking steadily toward the Union works at the head of his men. He was killed somewhere near those works, shot down within a stone's throw of the enemy line he had told his own soldiers they would probably die trying to reach. When the army lost Cleburne, it lost the one commander who might one day have argued Hood out of the next catastrophe, the one mind capable of holding the whole fragile machine together. There was no replacing him, and every man who knew that army knew it. His soldiers found his body the next morning, his sword and his watch already taken by looters in the dark, lying among the dead within sight of the wall he had been walking toward. They had followed him into a fire he had warned them would kill them, and most of them had turned out to be right about themselves as well. The sharpest division in the Western Army had been wrecked in a single evening, and the hand that knew how to wield it was cold. His death alone would have been enough to make Franklin a tragedy. But Cleburne was only the first, because as the assault crashed against the Union earthworks, the very same thing was happening to the rest of the Army's leadership all along the front, almost at the same moment. These were men who led from the saddle, out ahead of their soldiers, and at Franklin that lifelong habit of personal courage became a death sentence handed to nearly all of them at once. John Adams rode his horse straight at the Union line, and when he reached the wall of earth and timber the Federals had thrown up, he did not stop. He tried to jump it. He spurred his horse up onto the very crest of the enemy parapet, into the muzzles of men firing at point-blank range, and there both the horse and its rider were shot dead together. Adams's dead horse was found the next morning draped across the top of the Union works, and that image, a general's mount lying astride the enemy's own wall, became the single most haunting picture of the entire battle, a perfect and terrible measure of how close and how hopeless the fighting had been. Not far from him fell states' rights Gist, a South Carolinian whose father had been so consumed by the doctrine of states' rights that he had literally given his son that name. Gist had his horse killed beneath him, went forward on foot just as Cleburne had, and was struck down leading his brigade toward the works. And there was Hiram Granbury, a Texan at the head of a brigade of his fellow Texans, shot through and killed in the middle of the assault, in front of the men who had followed him through years of war. What is striking, when you stand back and look at all of these deaths together, is how alike they were. Not one of these men died safely, directing the battle from the rear the way a general is supposed to. Every single one of them was right up at the front, on the worst ground on the field, doing the most dangerous thing a man could possibly do there, because that was the only way they knew how to lead, and because the attack was so plainly hopeless that nothing less than a general on foot in the front rank would have kept the men moving forward into it at all. Gist had been a lawyer before the war. Granbury had practiced law in Texas and had lost his young wife to illness only the year before and had poured himself into the fighting afterward. These were not professional warriors bred for nothing else. They were men with whole lives behind them, and the same courage that had made them worth following was the exact quality that got every one of them killed. And there was Otho Strahl. Of all the deaths along that parapet, his says the most about what kind of men these were. Strahl ended up down inside the ditch directly in front of the Union works, in the very worst and most exposed place on the entire field, where his men were being shot down all around him. Rather than pull them back, he stood in that ditch and worked. He took loaded rifles passed up to him from the men behind and handed them forward to the men still firing at the wall, again and again, keeping the fire alive by hand in the middle of the slaughter until at last a bullet found him too. 4 generals, in the space of a few hundred yards in a few minutes, all of them down, all of them killed leading from the very front, all of them paying in full for an order that should never have been given. And then there was the 6th, whose death was the slowest and in some ways the most intimate of all. John Carter was mortally wounded in the assault, shot through the body, and unlike the others, he did not die out on the field. He was carried off it, still alive, and taken to a farmhouse near the town, and there he lingered in great pain for about 10 days before he finally died. 5 of the 6 were gone within hours. Carter took a week and a half to follow them down. In the cold, gray days after the battle, the bodies of several of the dead generals were carried to a nearby plantation house called Carnton, which had been turned into a field hospital, its floors stained dark with the blood of the wounded who filled every room. And there, on the back porch of that house, the bodies of 4 Confederate generals were laid out together, side by side, in the pale December light. It is one of the most quietly devastating images the entire war ever produced. Not a heroic painting, not a monument, just 4 capable men, 4 commanders an army could not possibly spare, lying in a silent row on the wooden boards of a farmhouse porch, because of an order that every one of them had known was hopeless before the first man ever stepped off. The woman who owned that plantation house, and the families of the little town around it, spent the days and the weeks that followed living among the wounded and the dead, tending broken men they had never met, in rooms whose floorboards would never come fully clean again. The battle itself had lasted barely 5 hours. Its weight would press down on that small Tennessee town and on the porches of houses like that one for a very long time afterward. And the 6 dead were not even the whole of the bill. Beyond the 6 killed or mortally wounded, still more of the Army's generals were wounded at Franklin, and another was taken prisoner, so that by some counts, the Army of Tennessee lost as many as a dozen or more of its general officers, hit in one way or another, in that single afternoon. This is what the word decapitation actually means. Franklin did not merely bloody the army, it cut off its head. The men who knew the regiments by name, who understood the particular character of each brigade, who held the entire structure together at the level where battles are genuinely won and lost, were killed in the span of a few hours. And an army that loses that many of its leaders that fast does not simply lose a battle. It stops, in any real sense, being an army at all. To grasp what that truly cost, you have to understand that an army is not really run from the top. It is run from the middle, by the brigade and division commanders who know which regiment can be trusted on a bad day and which one is about to break, who know exactly where to place each unit in the precise moment to move it. That kind of knowledge cannot be written down in an order or handed to a stranger overnight. It lives inside the heads of experienced men who have spent years learning their own soldiers. And at Franklin, an enormous share of all that hard-won knowledge was simply erased in a single evening. The men in the ranks who survived would go on fighting, but the hands that knew how to use them well were, to a terrible degree, gone for good. So when you hear that 6 generals died in 5 hours at Franklin, understand that the number itself is not the point. The number is only the door. Behind it stands 6 real men, an Irish immigrant who had made himself into the smartest soldier in the army, a general who died trying to leap a wall on horseback, men who went forward on foot when their horses were shot, because going forward was the only thing they knew how to do. They were brave, genuinely and remarkably brave, and they were also thrown away, spent for nothing by a commander who would not listen, and both of those things are true at exactly the same time. That is what makes Franklin so hard to look at directly. It is not a story of noble sacrifice in a worthy cause, and it is not a story of fools who deserved what they got. It is the story of capable, courageous men destroyed by the obstinacy of one general, and the honest weight of it lands precisely in holding those 2 truths together and refusing to let go of either one. The army these 6 men died leading would stagger on for only 2 more weeks. Then, a little to the north, outside a city called Nashville, what was left of it, an army that had already lost its head on the field at Franklin, would finally be destroyed for good. But that, the last death of a body that had already lost its brain, is a story all its own.